Almost every food that people think is disgusting is an animal product. And the odor of disgust is the odor of decay.
The thread in my work is finding the gray zone between attraction and repulsion. So it's like a car crash. It's the fascination of just looking for a little bit.
People saying things that are mean or like being bullies. It's stuff like that that disgusts me more now as a parent than bodily fluids ever will.
I think there's a lot of leaders on all sides of the political spectrum that use a disgust response to embolden their own power.
Hey, it's Julie, and this is Top of Mind, where we tackle tough topics with nuance and an open mind. We're out to become better citizens, kinder neighbors, and more effective advocates. Today, we're exploring the hidden power of disgust.
We've got 80 of the world's most disgusting foods on display, so it's hard to only pick a few of them. But I mean, some of the more spectacular are roasted guinea pig from Peru.
Samuel West is co-founder of the Disgusting Food Museum in Sweden.
We have stinky tofu from China. And this is what's interesting. There's no real recipe for it. It just calls for making it as stinky as possible, using milk, fish, some kind of fresh meat, and just allowing that to ferment. The jar I have it's one of the more vile things at the museum.
What is America represented?
Oh yeah, of course. For example, we have the junk food from the United States. If you would ask, Europeans, Swedes maybe in particular, people would say, "Oh, it's so full of fat and sugar and artificial ingredients. That's disgusting." Twinkies, Pop-Tarts.
Oh, come on. Nobody thinks that Twinkies and Pop-Tarts are as disgusting as stinky tofu.
So this is what makes it interesting, because what we think is good and tasty, someone else thinks is disgusting. So like we're chatting about stinky tofu being, how could anybody eat that? It's very popular street food in China. The street food vendors build up a respectable, formidable reputation for having the stinkiest and the best tofu. So the foods we're not familiar with are the ones that we often find disgusting. Disgust is one of the 6 fundamental universal human emotions. They're found everywhere, in every culture, every place on earth. I mean, the whole function of disgust biologically is to keep us from eating harmful food. And then you can understand the stinky tofu or the fermented fish, that smells bad. So you have a sort of a biological inclination to avoid that.
And yet cultures have embraced these foods.
Yeah, so the interesting aspect here is that when it comes to disgust, it's an innate, sort of hardwired emotion. But we have to learn what is disgusting. So that's purely cultural.
And even within cultures, our disgust triggers differ. I grew up in Utah, home of the famous fry sauce, which is a mixture of ketchup and mayonnaise that I find so repulsive. Just the sight of it makes me want to heave. But most people I know won't even eat their French fries without it. So disgust is innate, it's shaped by culture and individual sensitivities, and it goes much deeper than food, which is why we decided it merits a whole episode of Top of Mind. Because disgust shapes how we treat one another, and even how we vote. If we hope to live together more peaceably in this fractious moment, we need a clear understanding of how disgust drives us and how to keep it in check. In a moment, we'll hear from the world's leading expert on the science of disgust. But first, I want you to meet somebody who spends her days toying with our capacity for disgust.
My name is Andrea Hasler. I grew up in Switzerland, but I've lived in London for the last almost 3 decades, and I'm a sculptor.
So she's famous for deconstructing designer bags and shoes, and she keeps the original handles or decorative flourishes from the designer item, but then rebuilds the rest of it out of wax and resin to look like a mound of oozing, glistening intestines and globules of fat.
The thread in my work is analyzing consumer behavior and analyzing sort of the emotional connections to consumerism. And I do that by finding the gray zone between attraction and repulsion. So things that are in one way very seductive and desirable, and on the other hand, repulsive. People are really attracted to just quickly touch it. And it's that sort of thing of, in one way, you want to move back because it should be hidden. But then also it's like a car crash. It's the fascination of just looking for a little bit.
And it's really important to Hustler that she stay in that middle place of seduction and repulsion.
There's there's artists who work with similar visual elements in a very shocking way, but I'm not interested to just shock. I want to make people think and sort of have a reaction, but not just, if it's just to be repulsed by it, then the pieces have sort of failed. It needs to be a trigger for more.
Are there certain things that you won't do because you know that it'll be too far?
Yeah, no, there's sort of different triggers. And for example, I've learned that if I mix these type of visceral sculptures with hair, the reactions, when there's hair on it, that's a step too far. Yeah, people are really grossed out. And if you, it's different if the hair looks like it's growing out, then it's more acceptable because it looks like it's growing. But when it's sort of rubbed on top, yeah. So it's the context of where, luscious hair is, it's used as a seductive element in, commercials. But if you find a piece of, or sort of clogged up hair in the sink, the reaction is one of repulsiveness.
And do you use models? Do you look at something that you're trying to create in your sculpture?
I am vegan, so I find it very difficult to, for example, to go to a butcher's. I can't. I sort of, it's a no-go for me because I look much more at visual printed material. Early on, I used to go to the butcher's and sort of, collect meat pieces and have them. And I don't do that anymore. I find it too difficult.
Are you not disgusted by your own work?
It's just wax. And it's, it's sort of off-white colored wax. And I put pigments in it. And because I know the process of how, and I have to say, I'm still really fascinated. And I'm still perfecting, even after all these years, I'm still perfecting or tweak my technique of how to make certain areas look a little bit sort of almost more wet or more like they have a layer of sort of white fat on it. I get really obsessed by it, but I would, never want to eat a steak.
Why do you think we are both fascinated and some things can be both attractive and repulsive at the same time?
It's a big question. Well, I have no answer for it, but I do think, because it's the element of, it's also the, what would you call it? It's almost the danger. Things that are disgusting often look like they could grow or they could change shape, or it's the element of unpredictability would be my guess, but actually I have no idea.
To see photos of Andrea Hustler's sculptures, find her online at andreahustler.com. We'll put a link in the show notes. Although I would recommend that you not look while you are eating. I made that mistake. If disgust is an innate response intended to protect us, what could possibly be the point then of this strange attraction to something that triggers that disgust response?
Humans have a special ability, only humans, to come to enjoy situations in which the body is sending a negative signal to them. But they realize that they're really safe. They're not threatened. We can do things that seem harmful and are actually good for us.
Next on Top of Mind, we'll hear about the surprising flexibility of our disgust response. I'm Julie Rose. This is the BYU Radio Podcast Network. Hey, Top of Mind listeners, I have another podcast I want to recommend to you. It's from the BYU Radio family of podcasts, and it's called The Appleseed. It's a show filled with stories for you and your family. Each episode features master storytellers sharing all kinds of stories, folk tales, fairy tales, personal and family tales. So it's perfect for road trips, for bedtime, or really anytime you're looking for something that the whole family can enjoy together. And the stories you'll hear will likely get your family sharing their own stories with each other, which is really the best part. It's the payoff. So listen to The Appleseed wherever you get your podcasts. Paul Rosen is a retired professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. He's nearly 90, but still happy to chat at length about pioneering the study of disgust.
I study largely how humans relate to food, and that's how I got into disgust, which is much bigger than food, but that's how I got into it.
It started decades ago with a question he had about meat.
Because meat is the most nutritious food, really, and it's valued all over the world. And yet the Americans eat practically no meat. We eat 3 mammals, for example, out of 4,000 mammals. And we only eat the meat, basically, the muscle. We don't eat most of the rest of the animal. That was really odd. And so that led me into why don't we eat most meat? And the answer is disgust. Almost every food that people think is disgusting is an animal product.
Really?
Now, animal products have a number of other features. They spoil. They smell bad when they sit around. Plant products don't do that much either. And the odor of disgust is the odor of decay, which is characteristic of meat spoiling.
And the one thing that has been found to trigger disgust in people of all cultures, says Rosen, is the decaying stuff in our own gut.
Feces is the original and universal disgust. Of course, feces is a vehicle for infection, for pathogens.
But we're not born disgusted by feces.
It probably occurs, it's something to do with toilet training. I mean, that's when little kids have no problem with feces. They'll eat it, they'll play with it, and eventually it becomes negative because of toilet training. It does appear that toilet training in one form or another is universal.
So it's an entirely learned response then?
Well, it could be that we have a predisposition to learn that certain things are disgusting. That hasn't been shown, but it's possible that that's true. But toilet training, it takes a while, and it takes a while to get kids to avoid feces, feel it's revolting.
Do other animals experience disgust?
Now, not everyone agrees with this. I would say no. And one reason I would say no is that contamination, which is, I think, part of disgust, that it renders something inedible when it touches it. That isn't true in any animal. So that there are things that they'll avoid, but not if they just touch something else. And the other thing is that lots of animals eat feces, like little babies do.
Help me understand what the contamination component is. That's a requirement of something that is disgusting will always also have this contaminating component for adults,
yes,
for humans?
I would say that again. There's some controversy in all of this. Part of my definition of disgust is that disgusting substances are contaminating. Feces touches something, it's fecesized. When a cockroach has touched something, it's cockroached. And this includes what we call moral disgust. Most people would say Hitler's disgusting. And Hitler is contaminating. Nobody wants to wear Hitler's sweater. Nobody wants to hold Hitler's books. And it's not just because he's a bad idea. You don't like the thought of him. We have shown that most people would rather hold a copy of Mein Kampf, Hitler's book, a new copy, rather than hold his English dictionary, which he touched. So in other words, the English dictionary has Hitler in it because he touched it, whereas his Mein Kampf has only got his ideas in it. A new copy of Mein Kampf. It's also offensive, and you might even say disgusting, Mein Kampf, but it doesn't have the same gutsy effect as Hitler's English dictionary does. This contamination I talked about is called contagion in the literature. It's the law of contagion. If something touches something else, passes its properties. There's another law that went with that, discovered at the turn of the 20th century by a number of anthropologists, which is something looks like something, it is something. And we show that people would not eat a piece of chocolate made to look like dog do. They know it's chocolate.
They can smell that it's chocolate. They know
and they see a piece of the chocolate it's made of right next to it. But they say there's a piece of their brain that says, looks like dog do is dog do. And that's a very good heuristic. If it looks like a snake, it's a snake.
Yeah.
And so this can become problematic in some situations, and it can become humorous.
You're making me think of a conversation I had with Andrea Hasler, who's a sculptor, and she creates sculptures that look very realistic, as though it's like intestines and raw meat, and it's all pinkish and bloody, and there's fat, and it's very, I find it really gross to look at, but also she says she's trying to find that line where people are attracted but also repulsed. Like, why would someone want to like lean into something that's also kind of gross?
So I got into this problem, and as I studied it, I realized that it was related to something I had done before, which had nothing to do with disgust, which is, why do people like hot pepper? Hot pepper makes your mouth burn, and basically that's a signal, get this out of your mouth.
Yeah.
Here we have 2 billion people or more who eat it and love it every day. So that's another example to me of how we get to like disgust, as, for example, in stinky cheese in Americans. Not all people do, of course. Or in other parts of the world, there's fermented fish and other things that people love.
Mm-hmm.
And my account of this, it's just one account, is what I call benign masochism. Humans have a special ability, only humans, no evidence for this in any animal, to come to enjoy situations in which the body is sending a negative signal to them. But they realize that they're really safe. They're not threatened. The best example is the roller coaster. People enjoy the fact that their heart is pounding and their body thinks they're, crashing to death, but they know that they're not. And that realization makes you feel, sort of elevated. You're better than your body at knowing these things.
But why? Like, what's the point of that? If we think about some of this, is there any adaptational reason why?
I don't think so. I think it's a side effect of a general fact that we have a mind, and that we can evaluate our body's responses and put value on it.
Yeah.
Animals don't do that.
So we can overcome our disgust, or we can at least reduce our automatic response to something that we find disgusting, right?
Or we can, if we don't reduce our automatic response, we can come to tolerate it or even like it, as with stinky cheese. People who eat stinky cheese, they'll say, I love it that it stinks. We can do things that seem harmful and are actually good for us.
That's Paul Rozin, the father of disgust research, retired professor of psychology at the University of Pennsylvania. I started thinking about all the things we do that are either disgusting or upsetting, but we do them anyway for our own good or for others, like giving blood or doing emergency first aid on a stranger or spending time with someone whose hygiene is off-putting. And then I thought about parents.
There's just some things that kids do that you have to get used to. Getting peed on, dealing with poops and blowouts.
Samantha Ashbacher's biggest disgust trigger, though, is vomit.
That's the one for me. It's just where I think I draw the line is throw up. If my husband's home, he gets those ones. He gets those calls. But I think I have been able to get a little bit of a stronger stomach if he's not home. My 11-month-old right now, she has 2 teeth. So she's still learning how to eat. And so there's a lot of the gagging and regurgitating of dinner. And the other night, I think we were out and she started doing it. And I just stuck my hands like right under her mouth. And it all came up right into my hands. And I was like, it's better to be in my hands than like on the table or on the floor or like on my clothes. I think I probably peaked in my mom grossness with that one.
In a case like that, or another instance where one of your children is doing something disgusting.
Right, yeah.
Something, they're being sick, they're vomiting. Like, is there ever a fleeting moment where you find them disgusting?
No. I think there's things that, I think, oh, you don't know that that's gross yet. And I think those are things that as a parent, I'm just like, you know what? These are They're kids. They're learning how to be humans. This is their first time on the earth. But there are things now as an adult and a parent that I have less patience for and putting up with in terms of gross behaviors. And that's usually stuff that comes from other adults. Being judgmental about parents that are struggling with kids having meltdowns in public. People saying things that are mean or like being bullies, like behaviors that, I obviously found disgusting before. I have less patience for now that I'm a parent because I don't want my kids to see those behaviors and mimic them. I was at the post office a couple of weeks ago with my kids. And, I feel like we live in a pretty diverse community. We have a large population of Spanish and Portuguese speakers. And, there were two families in there that were speaking Spanish to each other. They weren't bothering anybody. We're all there with our kids just trying to go about our business. And this woman in front of me turns to me and she goes, "Is this America?" And I was so shocked. I didn't think I heard her right the first time. And I said, "Excuse me?" She goes, "Oh, is this America?" Like, just so shocked that people are speaking Spanish in the post office. And I was like, this is an important moment. Like, my son is 4 years old. He's about to start preschool. He's standing there watching me interact with this woman. I was like, yeah, this is the melting pot. And our country was, founded on being a place that everybody could come. And, I don't have any problem with someone speaking their native language. It doesn't bother me. I don't, that it's stuff like that disgusts me more now as a parent than bodily fluids ever will.
Samantha Ashmacher lives in Massachusetts with her husband and 2 kids. So, disgust may have started as a biological response to protect us from diseased food. But research building on Paul Rosin's work has found that disgust also plays a role in a behavioral immune system in humans. Because we live in communities and rely on one another for survival, disgust drives us to reject people who seem like they might infect us with their bodies, behaviors, or ideas.
We have seen that in many cases where once disgust is attached to a people, it can be very difficult to dislodge.
That's next on Top of Mind from the BYU Radio Podcast Network. I'm Julie Rose. Hey friends, I would like to take just a moment and introduce you to another show from the BYU Radio family of podcasts. It's The Lisa Show. Lisa Valentine Clark is the host. She's a comedian, actress, believer, single mom. And the show delves into the multitude of challenges that shape our lives, whether it's parenting, mental health questions, social issues. Lisa and the Council of Moms will tackle it and do it with a lot of laughs along the way as we attempt to figure out this thing called life. So check out The Lisa Show. Listen wherever you get podcasts.
So psychologists like Paul Rosin have developed scales to measure how sensitive people are to experiencing the emotion of disgust.
This is Vanderbilt political science professor Cindy Kam.
So I'm interested in how people are different in the extent to which they experience disgust and whether that variation in disgust sensitivity helps us understand the policies that they want from government. So people will answer questions such as, well, how disgusting would it be if a friend gave you a piece of chocolate that happened to be shaped like poop? Or how disgusting would you find it if you take a sip from a glass only to discover your friend took a sip from it?
The Disgust Sensitivity Survey has about 30 questions. We'll put a link to it in the show notes because I know you're dying to find out what your own score is. And it turns out there's a huge range. Paul Rosin told me, on the one hand, there are people who are almost completely insensitive to feces. They're just not disgusted by it hardly at all. And on the other hand, you've got people who won't even blow their nose in a brand new piece of toilet paper just because it's toilet paper. One of Paul Rozin's proteges is the now famous moral psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who has concluded that people who are easily disgusted are also more likely to be political conservatives. Disgust, says Haidt, shapes what we consider sacred and what's taboo. And this is reflected in politically conservative language like sanctity of life or sanctity of marriage, says Haidt. But Cindy Kam has found that it's more complicated than that.
As a political scientist, I would say conservatism is complex. What I have found, yes, is that there's a relationship between disgust sensitivity and some people's attitudes on social policies that have a moral component, such as abortion, such as same-sex marriage. However, if conservatism also means, do you want capitalism or do you want socialism? Then disgust doesn't really have a role to play in adjudicating between those.
And what's especially interesting is that disgust can actually be a basis for cross-partisan common ground, says Kam. So think about what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic.
I have a recent paper that's coming out where we look at people's attitudes towards infectious disease. We find that Republicans who are the most disgust sensitive were actually pretty close to Democrats who were disgust sensitive in wanting more government mitigation. They were more likely to say that they would protect themselves by engaging in behaviors like masking and social distancing. They were more reluctant to return to regular life, and they were more supportive of active government policies that were designed to mitigate COVID-19. So in that way, if we all talk about a big partisan divide, disgust sensitivity in that context helped bridge part of the divide between Republicans and Democrats.
We're also seeing this in the Make America Healthy movement, where disgust sensitivity unites a whole range of political ideologies behind concerns around contaminants in our food and our drugs. Plus, and this is maybe the most sobering finding from Professor Kam's work, our disgust response is so powerful that it is pretty easily manipulated.
In the experiment, my research participants, who were online survey takers, received what looked like a newspaper article. In that newspaper article, it talked about food safety. Food safety concerns were discussed using sort of bland or sanitized language, or it was discussed using disgust-laden language. So, for example, produce is unsanitary for hygienic reasons versus produce is grown in fields where workers are leaving their feces. Say workers being in the fields and being ill with particularly vivid descriptions of how maybe they had a tummy ache. So between the two different vignettes, I asked people to what extent they would support more spending on food safety laws. And the people who were in the disgust rhetoric condition were more likely to support spending on food safety, especially if they were disgust sensitive. And I do think that disgust is something that is evoked in people very easily and can be marshaled into politics, but I think it can be also dangerous. We have seen that in Hitler's rhetoric in World War II. We have seen that certainly in the LGBT movements. We have seen that in many cases where once disgust is attached to a people, it can be very difficult to dislodge.
What ways then, if we were to kind of narrow in, can you think of examples where politicians or political groups, activist groups are intentionally leaning into that for their own purposes?
I think some of the language around people experiencing homelessness, I think some of the language around people who are in the United States and are undocumented, language that talks about groups as dirty, language that uses metaphors to build a similarity between, say, a group and some animalistic quality like hordes or teeming. lends an animalistic quality that can be disgust evoking.
Interesting. So it's a very subtle connection that you're not like the Nazis calling Jews cockroaches, but using like adjectives that kind of are adjacent.
That's correct, because the way that the mind is organized, we think of the mind as being organized in associative networks, where one idea is linked with a whole bunch of ideas. So if you trigger one idea, like dirty, it will then light up a bunch of related ideas, right? And then the group that is talked about in that sense becomes embedded in that network too. I like to think of disgust as being a primary emotion that enters into our minds, whether we like it or not. We may or may not invite it, but it gets in the car with us. And I think if we go on autopilot, it's very easy to let disgust take over. And that could be helpful sometimes when we need protecting, but disgust also operates on hyper-surveillance mode. So it can be overprotective, and as we've discussed before, it makes things up.
What are the questions I'd be asking myself then as I'm trying to decide, do I want to let it stay in the front seat or should I push it to the back seat? Because it is protective in some cases.
Yes. I think you'd ask yourself, like, what's this policy really about? Right? Can I see a reason that I want it to protect me and I want it to protect other people? Or am I trying to just build distance between myself and some group of people that I am just reacting emotionally to? But it takes work. So I guess the question is how much work people want to put into politics, right? Often not a lot. But there's also a concern that if people don't put a lot of thought into politics, then they can just take the easy route. And that is to let disgust do the driving.
Cindy Kam is a professor of political science at Vanderbilt University. So we're going to finish up today with somebody who is making the choice on a daily basis to not let disgust drive her.
My name is Jane Anderson. I live in Gilbert, Arizona. I'm 49 years old. I have 4 kids that range from 15 to 23. I do like order. I do like cleanliness. And so I kind of knew going into motherhood that probably the baby toddler stage wasn't going to be like the best fit for my skill set. The diaper changing, the spitting up, cleaning the noses and all that kind of stuff. But for me, it was a means to an end, right? Like I have to help raise this little person to then be independent. Unfortunately for me, the temporariness has not proved to be our lifestyle.
Her 19-year-old son, Maddie, has blindness, cerebral palsy, and epilepsy. He has intellectual disabilities, and he needs constant care.
And I can tell you, changing an adult's diaper isn't just the same thing, but bigger. It is dramatically different. If you think about it this way, you take that child's diaper, you have that little diaper genie in the corner and, ooh, that, smells so bad. We're going to wrap it up. We're going to put it in that special thing and it hides the smell. The diapers, they're ginormous. There's no diaper genie for, backpack size, diapering situations. And so every diaper has to be walked out to the garbage can because it's so intense, the smell. Also, when you're dealing with an adult with special needs, sometimes, especially right now, what we're facing is a lot of violent behavior. So if you can imagine, if you've ever recalled changing a diaper of a little one that's kind of squirmy and you're trying to hold them down and maybe they're trying to grab and it's a little difficult. Now, sometimes the situation is I have to get up on the bed, sit right over his chest, hold down both of his hands, until he calms down, because we don't want any of the mess to get into his mouth. And he's a 19-year-old man, so he's very, very, very strong. Sometimes when I change his diaper, he will spit on me. And so it's just a much, much different situation.
Oh, Jane. I just can't imagine how hard that is. And I can tell how much you love him because you're still doing it for him. So how are you able to see him for more than the disgusting things that are required of you when you care for him?
I think when you're presented with a situation like this, you have a couple options. I can focus functionally on what has to get done, and it's very gross. So I can focus on that every time, be frustrated every single time, or I can say that this is my son and I want to give him dignity, and this is a gift that I can give him. I'm not saying that that's easy. I had a friend, though, that brought this little block of wood, and she said, put this right above the bed. And it just says, "Dear Mom, I love you." And so sometimes when I'm changing him and he's spitting on me, or he's biting, or he's screaming, I can look up and see that. And I know that's where his heart is. He just has physical and mental disabilities that prevent him from acting in a way that's appropriate to show that. And so I'm going to be a more effective mom if I can focus on the dignity piece. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to allow him to have that opportunity to feel dignity and worth, because this is not a choice that he's made. And the choice ultimately rests with me. And what am I going to make of this situation?
Choosing to keep her disgust response out of the driver's seat is something Jane Anderson also finds herself doing regularly in her work as an advocate for peacemaking and civic engagement.
I am so pleased to be able to be associated with a group called Mormon Women for Ethical Government. I'm the Arizona State Director, and it's my mission to try to bridge those gaps, try to get people talking to people that are different than them. So one of my favorite books is Love Your Enemy by Arthur Brooks. And one thing he talks about is motive, attribution, asymmetry. So this idea that somehow you have a perception about what someone's motives are, and it's actually just maybe even diametrically opposed to what that person's actual motivations are. And when we kind of buy into that, we believe the absolute worst about someone. And he says it leads us not just to be angry at someone, it's like one step further, and he calls that contempt. And contempt to me is the best way to say political disgust. I mean, to me, that's the same thing. And so instead of saying like, oh, I'll engage with you because I'm angry that we have difference of opinion, this political disgust or contempt says, you're not even worth my time to talk to anymore. And so I think when we attribute motivations, when we say, wow, that person should be trying harder, they should be doing better, we're never going to be in a place to really be peacemakers. We have to lean into curiosity and assume the best of people rather than the opposite. And I've seen it in myself. I remember during COVID, we were, online school was not great for any kid. Let's be honest. Online school was especially bad for children who are blind and have cerebral palsy and epilepsy. Because as COVID got locked down, we no longer had therapy appointments, no physical therapy, no speech, no respite care. My son's conditions were getting worse.
So she was desperate for things to get back to normal. And that meant, in her mind, all the things we were hearing from public health experts at the time to stop the spread of COVID: mask up, social distance, get vaccinated.
And I just remember around me, I had friends, family, neighbors who were kind of flouting all recommendations, not only given by like the state, but also like our church congregations. And they were like, this is dumb. We don't need to do it. And what it really felt like to me was so incredibly personal. Like you might as well just walk up to me and say, I don't care that this is harder for you and your son. And I was disgusted that people just didn't care about me. And then I recall we had a very open air event for our congregation where at Halloween, and I remember going to talk to someone that I knew based on social media posts, we had different approaches to vaccines. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is going to be bad, right? But I love this person. I served with this person. And we ended up having a really beautiful discussion where neither of us changed our mind whatsoever. But I wasn't disgusted by her. I recognized that she had a different position. I recognized that position might influence my family, but I tried to kind of not dehumanize or be disgusted to the point where I didn't value her as an individual. And I think there's a lot of leaders on all sides of the political spectrum that use a disgust response to embolden their own power. And I will fight against that with every fiber of my being. I don't care who you voted for. You're worthy of my time. You're worthy of a conversation. I will never stop talking to family members who voted for someone different. We'll joke and we'll have fun, as we talk about it. Yeah, I totally disagree with you, but I'm not going to be disgusted by you and have contempt for you and don't think you have value in my life anymore. We've got to move beyond that as a society.
Jane Anderson, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your wisdom with us.
Thank you for letting me share my experience and my hopes for how our nation can move forward.
So how sensitive is your disgust response? I'd love to hear what today's episode got you thinking about. Send an email to topofmind@byu.edu. Let's continue the conversation. Top of Mind is a BYU radio podcast. Today's episode was produced by Abby Karras and me, with help from Samuel Benson, Isabella Sosa, and Sam Payne. Our audio engineer is Hayden Thompson. I'm Julie Rose. We'll talk soon.